The Raiders reward Mad Maxx Crosby for being, well, Mad Maxx Crosby. All those details plus a whole lot more on Friday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for May 24th, 2024.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thanks so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available. As always, if you're checking us out on YouTube, you know we appreciate that. The show grows each and every day, and that's because of you and my man Ari. Ari does a great job each and every day making sure we're on YouTube looking good and sounding good. We definitely appreciate him. Shout him out on Twitter at Ari Produces. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Lots coming up on today's show. Segment number 3, your calls and texts. We'll get as many in as possible. Got a lot of great feedback throughout the course of the week, so we'll hit those calls. We'll hit those texts. That'll come up with segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Segment number 2, we're finally going to get into the playoff conversation, right? The Raiders did not make the playoffs in 2023. We know that. They were the 11th seed in the AFC. So how do they slide from the 11th seed to the top 7? Who do they knock off? That conversation is coming up, segment number 2. Here is segment number 1, news and notes of the day, as we always do. And before we get into that, I do want to say and shout out to everyone who has a loved one that they may have lost. This is Memorial Day weekend, and we got to remember what that stands for. And, you know, we shout out our veterans a lot. We shout out the 4th of July, Veterans Day, you know, and I don't do it enough, but I want to make sure that we show the love on Memorial Day and remember what it's about. The ones that paid the ultimate sacrifice so guys like me, knuckleheads like me, could do what I do on the daily and talk about the Raiders or talk about sports or live the life that I want to. So remember what this weekend is for. Of course, we'll talk about it more on Monday when it is actually Memorial Day, but don't want to go into the weekend without showing the love to the ones that paid the ultimate sacrifice, lost their lives, so we can have our freedoms that we do each and every day. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into, segment number 1 here, little news and notes action. And off top, the biggest piece of news for the day is Maxx Crosby. He got a raise. Not a contract extension, but a raise. The Raiders reworked the contract of 3-time Pro Bowl defensive end Maxx Crosby, gave him a $6 million raise for the upcoming season. This is according to Adam Schefter on ESPN. He actually tweeted this out pretty late Thursday evening. They said the team also moved an additional $1.2 million into 2025. So Crosby, he turns 27 in August, was due to have base salaries of $19 million, $21 million, and $21 million the next 3 seasons per ESPN stats and information. He gets that $6 million raise for the upcoming season, and that's just for him, being the guy that he is. The Raiders wanted to reward their leader, culture setter, and one of the best players in the league with the intent of keeping him in Vegas for years to come. No new years were added to Crosby's deal, meaning that the 26-year-old still has 3 years left on his current contract, and again, as I mentioned, turns 27 in August. But I thought that was great. Right? We always talk about and see contract extensions. We see players sign extensions and then someone else gets paid more and they get, some kind of way about it and they feel, some kind of way, then they want to get paid more. I think that the Raiders did it the right way with Maxx Crosby, where they didn't have to give him a contract extension. They didn't have to add years onto the back end of the deal. He's already on a monster contract, but just to give him a little tip of the cap and say, hey, here you go. You know what? Let's take care of you, bump you up for everything that you've done and everything that you mean to this organization. That's the way to do it. And that's what, hard work does for you, right? Maxx Crosby comes into the league as a 4th-round draft pick. Maxx Crosby comes into the league with John Gruden saying, your best friend's going to be Deuce Gruden. You got to get in the weight room and gain some weight. And Maxx Crosby goes on and has gone on to have a hell of a career so far and has been exactly what the Raiders need. Now he is the face of the franchise. And on top of that, he's getting paid like it. Right? I mean, Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels, they gave him the contract extension originally. Now, Tom Telesco, AP and company go and give him a $6 million raise. Again, not a contract extension. They didn't restructure. At first, when I saw the, Maxx Crosby and $6 million, I thought that they restructured his contract and just, put that up front like a bonus, like a lot of times you'll see happen. But no, this is an actual raise, a well-deserved raise for Maxx Crosby. And I think that's awesome. I think that's what more franchises should do. And I love the fact that the Raiders are rewarding their best player for being their best player and letting them know that if you go out there and you put in the work, you lead this team like you're supposed to lead this team, you change the culture, help change the culture like Maxx Crosby has done. And we know that Antonio Pierce needed that culture to be changed, but just to be the leader, be that guy that set the tone for the team, they're going to reward him, and they did. I thought that was awesome. Tip of the cap to the Raiders, and more importantly, tip of the cap to Mad Maxx Crosby, who has done everything he needs to and then some since entering the league. So there you go. Thought that was really cool and a great way to start things off today on the Locked On Raiders podcast. I did want to give you a little bit of an update. Raider Izzy, he called on and was on Thursday's show talking about the 2017 Vikings and, how there's some similarities to the potential Raiders in 2024. I actually talked about it in great detail on my radio show, Unnecessary Roughness, on Raider Nation Radio 920 on Thursday. And if you didn't get to hear the show, you didn't get to hear Raider Izzy's call, this is what he had to say about the 2017 Vikings and how they're comparable to this year's Raiders.
What up to you, Raider Izzy? Wanted to throw something at you. It was the 2017 Vikings. Really similar situation to what we're in now. So 2016, they go 8-8, I think it was, with Bridgewater. Don't really have too much of a direction, but have a lot of star power on offense. They had, Diggs, they had Thielen, Kyle Rudolph. 2017, I think they drafted Dalvin Cook. In 2017, they went 13-3 with Case Keenum. Case Keenum's first year in that offense, comes in, does a great job. They simplified the offense for him, but he had a ton of talent around him. They had a good offensive line. Their defense had Everson Griffin had 13 sacks that year. Daniil Hunter was obviously there. Kind of reminds me of the situation we're in. A ton of players, but the quarterback position just isn't there yet. But at the same time, all of these different role players, all these different skill sets, all these different, pieces will just help the quarterback. So if we can simplify the offense, which ironically I heard a lot in interviews talking about how difficult it was with Josh McDaniels' offense and how this one seems to be a little bit more simplified. That's a team, not saying we're going 13-3, but that team kind of shows how we can be successful despite not necessarily having a star quarterback, but being able to, utilize the pieces that we have just by simplifying the offense and letting them be the stars that they are. So kind of a cool thing I thought of.
So that was the call right there from Raider Izzy, and it really got the ball rolling for me. And I, like I said, went on the radio show and started talking about it. Got a lot of feedback from Raider Nation, but I also had Matthew Collar from PurpleInsider.com on my radio show to talk about that 2017 Vikings team and the Minneapolis Miracle, that big play that they had at the end of the season. And, of course, they go on the next week in the playoffs, and they're losing to the Philadelphia Eagles. They get kicked out the club. They get beat pretty bad, but that Minneapolis Miracle was amazing. That's coming off the heels of a 13-3 season, as Raider Izzy pointed out. So here's a couple of little sound bites that I got from Matthew Collar, just trying to compare and contrast that 2017 Vikings team to what potentially the Raiders could do in 2024. The first one is Matthew Collar on what really stood out to him about that team that was led by Case Keenum.
Yeah, it's so interesting because in training camp, I remember writing something about how they weren't sure about who was going to be QB2. Was it him or Taylor Heineke? There's a real battle between these two guys. And I also thought after Case Keenum's first couple of starts, after Sam Bradford got hurt, that they needed to go try to acquire a different quarterback. Does Mike Vick want to play or, whatever, because it had been so bad. But it was kind of one of those things where everything comes together perfectly, right? Where he came into a game that Sam Bradford started midway through, and he led this comeback where it just took a couple of good passes, a couple of good plays to get them back in the game. And suddenly everybody seemed to start trusting Case Keenum, and then it all just came together. Aaron Rodgers got hurt. Anthony Barr kind of took him out for the season. That helped a lot that the Green Bay Packers were not in competition. Mike Zimmer's defense stayed 100% healthy, and it had been built over a couple of years, so they were the number one defense in rushing and passing and points for that season. And I remember they played the number one offense at US Bank Stadium in the Rams, and they won the game 24-7, and the Rams didn't even have a chance offensively. So for Case Keenum, he only really needed to do so much. They ran the ball pretty well even after Dalvin Cook got hurt, and he just needed to make the plays he was supposed to make. But the funny dynamic to it was that Case Keenum didn't feel that way all the time, and sometimes would just kind of throw the ball up and hope and dream. And every single time he did, including the Minneapolis Miracle, it came down in the hands of Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen. And that was a huge part of it as well, was they just had two of the best wide receivers in the NFL. And if he was willing to put it in their vicinity, they were making plays and they were finding ways to score and, kind of play off the defense, not turn the ball over too much. And I think it was Case Keenum's personality as well that really galvanized that team, because he was, look, it's all the cliches, right? Like he was the gritty leader, the guy who was, coming to work hard every day and everybody believed in, but all that stuff was true for that year. Of course, as you've seen with Case Keenum, it was not true for his entire career, but sometimes it just works that way in the NFL where everything comes together among, the right circumstances around a guy like him.
So there you go. That's kind of the blueprint right there. And, the one detail that I had even forgot about that is the fact that Sam Bradford started off the season, but then tore his ACL, and then Case Keenum ended up being the guy after that. But obviously Sam Bradford wasn't out there but a quick minute, and that's when Case Keenum took over the rest of the way. And there's some really good details that Matt, detailed there in that soundbite talking about the team and, kind of how they formed and they gelled around Case Keenum. So then I went on to ask about the Raiders and if they could follow that same blueprint. Obviously not saying they're going to go win 13 games, but can they follow that same blueprint that Minnesota put out there in 2017? Here's his answer on that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing would be, and look, the Raiders last year had a pretty darn good defense.
Yeah.
And these defenses, with all of great defenses, it doesn't get built in a year. It doesn't get built in an offseason. Every offseason, some team signs 3 players and doesn't get as much better as they thought. But that is the similarity with the Raiders, though, is I've seen it come together from some very tough years on defense to now look pretty stout. Now, I don't know if it could be number one across the board. And then you do have to have some things go your way. The Vikings didn't have a very difficult schedule that year. They probably played 3 to 4 games against teams that were really good. So that helps all the time when you're going to have a top defense. But you did have a game manager who didn't mind letting it rip. And I think that you can squint and see Gardner Minshew and Case Keenum as a pretty good comparable. I think Minshew is actually more talented than Case Keenum is. The question I would have is, all right, of course we know Devontae Adams can be unstoppable. Who else, though? Because the Vikings ran the ball extremely well that year. Adam Thielen was the sort of Batman or Robin, whichever you decide you like better. They had Kyle Rudolph as a great tight end that year. Is there enough weapons to say that even a journeyman type of quarterback could have a really good year? Because, I think Case Keenum finished something like 8th in PFF grade or something that year, which would never be repeated, but you have to have a really great year from your quarterback still if you're going to be a serious contender. So is there enough people around him to be able to pump up his abilities to make him an at least top 12 starter for 1 year? That would be my question.
So you see where he's kind of like, they probably could follow that blueprint. It's not something that you can sustain for a long period of time, like multiple years, but maybe a season or two. And his only question was, do the Raiders have enough weapons? And look, I don't expect everyone who covers individual teams to know all the weapons for every single team, but I think that the Raiders, I think they do have the weapons. Devontae Adams, I don't care if you put him as Diggs or Thielen. Diggs that year, 64 catches, 849 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Thielen had a monster season with 91 catches, 1,276 yards, and 4 TDs. So between Adams and Myers, they could fill that Diggs and Thielen role, right? I feel comfortable with that. Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer, the 2 tight end set, right? Bowers is going to be moved all over the formation. Mayer will be the typical, kind of traditional tight end. And the Vikings had Kyle Rudolph, who had 52 catches, 532 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Between Bowers and Mayer, I think those numbers are very achievable or something close to it. And then Zamir White, who takes over as the running back. Of course, is going to be running back by committee, but he'll be the lead dog. At least he looks like he'll be the lead dog for 2024. And the lead guy for the Vikings that year wasn't Dalvin Cook. He tore his ACL. It actually ended up being ex-Raider Latavius Murray, who carried the rock 216 times for 842 yards and 8 touchdowns. Very, very achievable for the Silver and Black. The one big question will be the defense. The Vikings defense was number 1 across the board. They only allowed 15 points a game, and they scored 24 points a game, and they won 13 games. So can the Raiders have that number 1 defense across the board? Can they create as many turnovers as Minnesota did? Well, that's obviously remained to be seen. But, Maxx Crosby is very similar to Everson Griffin, who had 13 sacks in 2017. And Malcolm Kuntz, after having a breakout year, you can put him comparable to Danielle Hunter, who had 7 sacks for the Vikings in 2017. So I feel like the Raiders have the makeup. It all depends on if Aiden O'Connell and or Gardner Minshew, whatever the case may be, can fill that void and get the ball to the weapons and not turn the ball over and really just handle the game plan as it's set up. And does Luke Getsy have a good offensive game plan? Because I do think the defense will be really good. But I wanted to give you an update. I thought that was a great call from Raider Izzy and turned into a whole show that I had on my radio show, Unnecessary Roughness, on Raider Nation Radio 920. So if they do follow that footprint and that blueprint of what the Minnesota Vikings did in 2017 and they find a way to get into the playoffs in 2024, whose place are they going to take that was in the playoffs in 2023? We'll talk about that coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number 1 ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Time to talk about the potentials of playoffs in 2024. And look, the Raiders have got to find a way to get to double-digit wins. They had 8 wins in 2023. They ended up being the 11th seed. They got to find a way to get to double-digit wins and try to be one of the top 7. And the funny thing about it is I don't think it's impossible, right? I definitely, and as my window for their wins, just looking at the schedule, of course, they got to go out there and make it happen, was 9-8 to 10-7. And if you get to 10, then I feel like you put yourself in position to at least give yourself a chance at the playoffs. Again, none of that is guaranteed. But I did start thinking about the playoffs, and I thought about the top 7 teams that were in the playoffs in 2023 and thought, okay, well, if the Raiders were to be in the playoffs and be one of the top 7, who's not going to be in the playoffs? So I went back and looked. The division champs in 2023 in the AFC, the Bills at 11-6, the Ravens at 13-4, the Texans at 10-7, and the Chiefs at 11-6. All right, so if you look at the 4 divisions in the AFC, feel pretty comfortable with those 4 as division champs. Maybe Buffalo will do it again. I mean, I know that their team has switched up a little bit. Baltimore, I feel pretty comfortable with them, but they're in a tough division. Houston, I mean, there's going to be some questions there, and KC has been KC. So the wild card teams, Cleveland at 11-6, Miami at 11-6, and the Steelers at 10-7. Again, every team so far that made all those teams that made the playoffs were all double-digit win teams, right? 10-7 is the lowest that the win total was to make the playoffs. And the teams that missed the playoffs, the Bengals were the 8th seed. Remember, Joe Burrow got injured. They were 9-8. Jaguars, they started out 8-3, ended up the season 9-8. They were the 9th seed. The Colts, led by Gardner Minshew after Anthony Richardson went down, were the 10th seed. They were also 9-8, and they were one drop pass away from making the playoffs. And then the Raiders came in at the number 11 spot, and they were 8-9. So they weren't that far off. They were a couple of games off. Again, like I'm saying, if they could find 2 more wins, that's a chance to make the playoffs. Now, don't forget, the Jets were expected to be really good. They lost Rodgers early, and they ended up 7-10 overall. And the Chargers, I'll just throw them in there for S's and giggles because of the Chargers, and everyone always gives them props every year. They were 5-12. This year they have Jim Harbaugh. We'll see how that shakes out. I don't think that they'll be a playoff team this year. I do think that they're going to get better. I don't think this is going to be the year that they make some big jump. But that's just me, right? And also, we've heard this from the Chargers so many times. So I just threw it in there for S's and giggles. The Jets are 7-10. Chargers were 5-12. I expect both those teams to be better in 2024. How much better? Well, time will tell. So if you look at the teams that made the playoffs, and we've had some folks call in throughout the course of the week, as this was a very delayed conversation that we had, and mentioned Pittsburgh and mentioned Cleveland. And it feels like the AFC North would be that division, right? Would be the ones that could switch things up. If you have, the Bills winning in the East and you have, the South being won by the Texans or even the Jaguars, and then just say the Chiefs in the West, it feels like the North could be the one that is the wild card, right? Does Pittsburgh have another season where they win 10 games? Possibly. Does Cleveland win 11, right? I mean, and I think there's a lot of questions. There's probably more questions, in my opinion, around Cleveland because I don't know what Deshaun Watson's going to look like. He's definitely not going to be Houston Texan Deshaun Watson. Is he going to be good enough, though, to get him to 11 wins? They have a strong defense, have a strong run game, so we know the recipe is there for Cleveland to be successful, but a lot of things went right for him in 2023. And then in Pittsburgh, I guess I say that I have more questions about the Browns, but then again, you look at Pittsburgh and you say, who's Russell Wilson? Who's Justin Fields? So maybe that's the team you eliminate. So just say you take the Steelers off. Well, you got a spot there, but then are the Bengals better? Is Joe Burrow healthy all season? Are the Jaguars, do they take that next step? The Colts, I feel like the Colts are going to be not in the playoffs. I don't feel like they're even going to win 9 games. I think that Anthony Richardson, especially if he stays healthy throughout the course of the year, has a big learning curve. So I don't think that they're a playoff team there. And by the way, Joe Flacco is their backup. So if they have to go to him, maybe they do. But I feel like the Colts, you can almost put them out of the way. So now you got the Bengals, Jaguars, and the Raiders on the outside looking in, and maybe the Jets and Chargers. I mean, there's a lot of different teams jockeying for position for 7 spots. Does Buffalo? I mean, you got 4 division champs. I'm looking at a wild card spot. So if you got 3 wild card spots, does Miami take a step back? Maybe, right? I mean, again, it's hard to forecast because we're only in, May. We're not seeing any, training camp. We're not seeing any preseason games. Don't really know. But, I mean, that's the job is to find 2 more wins than they had last season. If they could do that, then they at least put themselves in position to be players with the rest of these teams. But I just think with the fact that there was 3 teams from the AFC North that were in the playoffs from Baltimore, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh, that would just be the natural. One of those teams probably won't be there. So maybe that's the hole that the Raiders slide into. There's 2 teams in the East from the AFC East between Buffalo and Miami. Maybe that's the case. Only 1 team represented from the AFC West, right? Can the Raiders slide in and be the second team into the playoffs? I know nobody wants to root for the Chiefs, but I think it's the inevitable that the Chiefs will at least be in the playoffs. More likely than not, they'll be the division champs, but they'll be in the playoffs, right? So you can almost kind of take that spot away. But can the Raiders be that second team? They can if they get to 10 wins. So that's going to be the task. That's going to be the job of Aiden O'Connell. That's going to be the job of Gardner Minshew, whoever wins that quarterback competition, the job of AP, and the job of the defense, right? I mean, I know a lot of people and the smart guys, they have, 6 wins, 6.5 wins is the total for the Raiders. I keep saying if they only win 6 games, something went terribly wrong in Antonio Pierce's first full year as the head coach. I think they're a better team with him as the head coach, especially starting the season and not coming in November 1st. But again, they have a tough schedule. It's pretty balanced, but it's still tough teams on the schedule. They're going to have to go out there and get it done. I like the way that the schedule is set up where there's a lot of AFC games early in the schedule. I think that helps, right? You can need as many AFC wins as possible. You want those conference wins. More conference wins gives you a chance at that wild card spot and potentially knocking out one of those teams, especially out of the AFC North, where 3 of them representing the playoffs with the Bengals barely on the outside looking in. And they didn't even have Joe Burrow for the whole season. So there's that. So what teams do you feel like could be potentially out in 2024 and maybe the Raiders slide in if they're a playoff team? Buffalo was a division champ along with Baltimore, Houston, and KC. The wild card teams, Cleveland, Miami, Pittsburgh. The teams that missed the playoffs, the Bengals, Jaguars, Colts, and Raiders. That was 8, 9, 10, and 11. And then don't forget about the Jets and the Chargers. Where do they slide in the mix? Let us know about it. 707-654-4693. That's the Locked On Raider Podcast voicemail line. Your calls and texts are coming up next in segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders Podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about Yahoo Finance. And wouldn't it be great if you could see all your investment and retirement accounts in one place? Well, with Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub and access the expert analysis you need to tend to your entire portfolio with confidence. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. It doesn't matter if you're a seasoned investor or are looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. They're the #1 finance destination, producing a holistic look at financial news cycles, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. Securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it's how Yahoo Finance ensures you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. I just like saying, look at your wealth. I would love to look at my bank account and say, man, look at my wealth. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, the #1 financial destination, yahoofinance.com. One more time for the folks in the back row, that's yahoofinance.com. Here we go, Raider Nation, segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts, you have that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start things off with a text from Chef Frank from Napa. He says, Q, my 11-year-old daughter and I listen to your podcast every day on the way to school. Today, she asked me if they do a Locked On Raiders t-shirt so we can match one another during the summer. Q, can you make that happen? That's from Chef Frank from Napa. Thanks so much for the text. I appreciate you. And shout out to you and your daughter. That's awesome, man. And thanks so much for making me a part of your daily routine. I think that that's really cool. And no, I don't have any Locked On Raiders podcast t-shirts. I know they have some Locked On Podcast Network t-shirts, but no Locked On Raiders podcast t-shirts. Maybe I can get some made at some point. I actually had a friend that made a couple for me at one point, a shirt and a sweatshirt, but that was just like a one thing just to represent for me. But yeah, if there's ever a way, if I ever see it or if I ever talk to somebody that can make some difference and make that happen, I'll definitely suggest it and see what they say. But, you know, thanks so much just for making me a part of your daily routine. And shout out to your daughter, 11 years old, representing for the Raiders. You're definitely raising her right. Not because you're listening to me, but because you're raising her Raiders. And that's the way to do it. Thanks so much for that text. I appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Southwest Florida Raider. He's calling to talk about the quarterback positions and what many were talking leading into the draft, then talks about the head coach. Here he is, Southwest Florida Raider.
Hey, Q. Southwest Florida Raider. Just a couple of observations that I'd like to make regarding quarterback and a couple other things. Leading up to the draft, 90 to 95%, I would estimate, of the nation was pounding the table. Hey, let's trade up, get a quarterback. I also heard absurd stuff like let's trade Devontae or trade Maxx to get a quarterback, move up in the draft, et cetera, et cetera. And I heard very little talk about how we can win or not win with our current quarterback situation. Now that the draft has come and gone, now all of a sudden there seems to be some delusion that we can get double-digit wins with our current quarterback situation. Wasn't it John Madden who said, if you have two quarterbacks, you got none? Well, that's what I think we have. Just my opinion. Secondly, something that I don't think too many people touch on. If you look at historically and even currently right now around the league, consistent winning teams have two things in common. They have either a very good or great quarterback, or they have a very good or great head coach. And unfortunately, I feel we have neither. Now, I might be in the minority with this. I mean, I love what AP has done as far as the culture goes, but it's not enough, at least for me, to be a former player, driving a 6 to the stadium, wearing Air Force Ones, et cetera, et cetera. That's all great. It gets players to relate and want to play. But until it translates to wins on the field, the jury is out for me as far as AP goes as a head coach. And then really AP and AOC versus the rest of the AFC, or AP and Gardner Minshew versus the rest of the AFC. I'm sorry, man. I'm not sold. I'm not sold. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm 100% wrong. But I don't see 10 wins out of this team. I see 8 at best. Anyway, love what you do. Peace out, Raiders.
Thanks so much for the call, my man. A little spicy there, right? I appreciate you. Clearly, you're not sold on the dynamic of the head coach and the quarterback, and that's fair. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, you want to wait and want and see what actually is going to happen. But I will say, as much as I pounded the table for the Raiders to trade up, and I did, I said it 1,000 times. Matter of fact, I might have said it 5,000 times. Trade up for Jaden Daniels, trade up for Jaden Daniels, trade up for Jaden Daniels. You have the ability to do it right now, right? You have a team that's really well built, and if you have that difference maker quarterback, you can go do it right now. I said that. There's no doubt about that. But I also said many times, about as many times as I said that I wanted the Raiders to trade up for Jaden Daniels, I also said that the quarterbacks that they have, you can win with. I also said that I was not hating on Aiden O'Connell. I was not hating on Gardner Minshew. I just wanted more. And that's okay to want that, right? But again, I thought that they could win with Aiden O'Connell. If they had to start on Sunday, they could, and they go out there and win games. So that is something that I said. I know I said that 1,000 times. We had shows based on that. But when it comes to AP, it was a small sample size. But what he brought to the Raiders last season, it did translate into wins, right? I mean, they easily could have folded after November 1st and never won another game. Instead, they were very competitive down the stretch. They went 5-4. He earned the job as the head coach. He brought the culture. He changed the culture from what it was. And I know, right? I don't brag and whatever about being in the locker room or being around the facility. I never do that, right? I take that as an honor and a blessing that I'm even able to do that. But I could tell you the difference that it meant when Josh McDaniels was gone and AP was there. Night and day. Breath of fresh air. Culture change. Players were happy to be there. Players were ready to go out there and play for their brothers. And now they got to turn that into wins this year. You know, you can't just be a feel-good story. But what he did definitely translated into wins. If AP's not there, they don't win that game on Christmas against the Chiefs last year on the strength of their defense. They don't do it, right? I don't think AP, a team that's not led by AP, puts up 63 points on the Chargers, right? I don't think that happens. There's just a different mentality that he brought to the team, and you could see it. You could see that switch. When they cut Marcus Peters, that was an AP thing. Couldn't have it. Didn't like the style he was playing. Wasn't representing the correctly, right? I mean, yeah, what he did last year, it absolutely translated to wins. So, look, I can understand you wanted to see more. That's fine. But to say that what AP did didn't translate into wins, that's just wrong. It's not my opinion. That's just facts. So, you know, I don't have any problem saying that. You know, and again, you're right about the quarterback position. A lot of us said that the Raiders need to trade up and go get their guy. They didn't do it. Fine. Aiden O'Connell's the guy. That's why we talked about what we talked about in segment number 1. Case Keenum went 13-3 with the Vikings. They went to the playoffs. The Raiders could win with Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. I think the Raiders roster is just as good, if not better, than that 2017 Vikings team. But the Vikings put it all together. They had already had a winning culture there under Mike Zimmer. And they had some nice pieces in place, and they had the number 1 offense across the board, or defense across the board. So that obviously helped. And again, to your credit, the Raiders got to go out there and do it. You know, again, the AP can't be a feel-good story. You know, he's got to be the guy to make it happen. So thanks so much for the call. I do appreciate you, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, there's no doubt that what he's done already, turned into wins for the Silver and Black. Up next, got a text from Raider Jason in the 304. It says, "Hey Q, Raider Jason from the 304. Here are a few opinions to add to the recent discussions. 1, the schedule is very balanced this season. Other than division games, that game against Pittsburgh is a must-win. Also, don't sleep on that game in New Orleans. I think they are a borderline playoff team. 10 or 11 wins is realistic if things fall our way. 2, sounds like they got started out well at OTAs. Excited about this staff running this offseason. 3, I think O'Connell will initially win the job. Both quarterbacks have a high floor. We sort of know Gardner's ceiling. Aiden could surprise us all with his ceiling. 4, rest in peace to Jim Otto, the original Raider, 00. Thanks for that show. As always, love the show. Excellent work. Just win, baby, and go Raiders. That's from Raider Jason in the 304. Thanks so much for the text. Good details right there, and talked about a variety of subjects that we've talked here each and every day on a Locked On Raiders podcast. I don't really think I have to add anything to it. You made some great points there, all 4 of them. Appreciate you, and have a fantastic weekend. Up next, got a call from Lane from Mansfield. And I believe he said his name is Lane. He's calling to talk about the latest podcast from Maxx Crosby called The Rush with Aiden O'Connell on it, and also brings up the call from Raider Izzy. Here he is, Lane from Mansfield.
Hey, what's up, Q? I got a little something to say to Raider Nation. Y'all need to check out Maxx Crosby's podcast and watch the one with Aiden O'Connell. I'm not sure if another caller has mentioned this, but it's a really good video. AOC is most likely going to be our starter next year, and it's really a great opportunity to get to know the guy. Now, we all know we'd be more confident in Jaden Daniels starting, but that just isn't the case. If you watch the video, it'll put AOC in a new light. He's a chill dude who really only wants to win. He's got a great head on his shoulders. Also, shout out to the caller who referenced Case Keenum and the Vikings team. I could easily see, and in fact, that's how I do see is the Raiders season playing out, which is just an unlikely team who's going to win games. We're going to defy the odds. We're going to win games that we're probably not supposed to win because we have the X factor in AP. We have a better coaching staff than a lot of the teams in the NFL right now. I can just easily see the Raiders overperforming, and I think 9-8 is an insult. No offense, Q, but I think 9-8 is a pretty crappy record considering, everything that's happened in the off season. The free agency pickup in Wilkinson and Brock Bowers, who just totally revamps his offense into something that it's never been before, in my opinion. Defense is playing great. Special teams is going to be killer. I don't know, man. I feel confident in AOC, and I feel confident in this defense. I feel confident in Antonio Pierce, and I just feel confident in this team in general. Anyways, that's all I got. Raider Nation, you guys have a good weekend. I'm out. Also, this is Lane from Mansfield. What's up?
Lane, thanks for the call, my man. I appreciate you. And yeah, there's been a lot of reference to Crosby's podcast, The Rush. It's a fantastic one. I encourage everyone to go check it out. The latest edition has Aiden O'Connell on it. He had Gardner Minshew on that before it, but the latest one has O'Connell. I heard it's really good. I haven't listened to it yet. I know he explains the number 4, how he got it, why he changed it. And as far as Raider Izzy and the 2017 Vikings, that was a great call. Again, that turned into a 3-hour radio show that I did on Thursday on Raider Nation Radio 920. And then, of course, what we did today in segment number 1. It was a really good call. It really made me get to thinking. I saw an article that was out there. I can't remember who put it out there. Maybe it was just Blog Baby or whatever. It was tweeted to me, and someone wanted me to talk about it. And it had to do with the 2000 Raiders and how, or the 2000 Ravens, I should say, and how the Raiders 2024 team is eerily similar to that team. And I wasn't willing to go there, but I can see it with that 2017 Vikings team, like Raider Izzy said. So thanks so much for that call. I do appreciate you. And that's all I got time for on today's show. Got a call from Raider X, got a text from Mr. James in Nashville. We'll get back to that on Monday. Yes, on Monday we will have a show. It's Memorial Day. I started off the show showing love to the ones that paid the ultimate sacrifice for us, and that's why we have Memorial Day. I know that we shout out the veterans and everything, but Memorial Day is about the ones that lost their lives for us. But I also do want to shout out the veterans. I do want to shout out the ones that are in the active military right now. I want to shout out to the first responders, police, firemen, everyone, right? Anyone who's in any kind of walk of life like that helps take care of us on a daily, I want to show the love to, because they show the love to us without ever saying a word, just going out there and again, putting their life on the line each and every day that they go out. So we can never, ever thank them enough. I get caught up in the, hey, happy 4th of July. Let's remember what it's about. Happy Veterans Day. Let's remember what it's about. Happy Memorial Day. Like, I do get caught up in that. That's my fault. I want to be better at that. I try to be better at that. And, it just takes practice. Practice makes perfect, to make sure that we get in the habit, and I get in the habit. I need to lead off, get in the habit of making sure I show that love more often, right? When I see, families that are affected, when I see, families that have lost loved ones. And that's the other thing. When we're thinking about Memorial Day, let's think about the families that lost their loved ones, right? And even the ones that come back, the veterans that come back to their families who were still without their loved one for a long time. And that's a sacrifice in itself as well. So we can all ball it into one, but again, a Memorial Day is special. It means a lot. We know what it means. A lot of folks paid the ultimate sacrifice, so knuckleheads like me can do this show on the daily, and we can all do what we want to do and have the freedoms that we do have. So thank you so much for that. We do appreciate you, all the veterans out there. We do appreciate you as well, and all the active military, police officers, first responders. We thank you as well. So until Monday, we'll be back. It'll be Memorial Day, but we will have a show. If you listen to it Monday, great. If you listen to it Tuesday, you got 2 shows. It's just like that. So have a fantastic weekend. Stay safe. Take care of your family. Love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.